Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at the 2022 Senate election in Missouri and why it's not going to be that competitive. Now, I know Let's Talk Elections made a video talking about this, and I think that most of his takes are rational. I just don't agree with what he was talking about in a previous video. I'm not going to play it. I don't have the time or the energy right now to debunk a video of his. Plus, he doesn't say anything factually incorrect. I just disagree with him on this one thing. But now, taking a look at the last time a Democrat won Missouri at the presidential level, we can talk about statewide elections too. And the last time a Democrat won a statewide election in Missouri was in 2018, but that was an auditor's race. Doesn't really count. The last time they won an interesting statewide election or something that meant something was in 2012, where Claire McCaskill won re-election to the U.S. Senate. We'll talk about that as well. Actually, I should open the tab right now, so I don't have to do that later in the video. But anyways, looking at Bill Clinton's win in 1996 here, this was not a landslide. He didn't crack 50% of the vote. Now, obviously, Ross Perot was a part of that. He had a pretty strong showing for a third-party candidate, getting 10% of the vote, but he still only beat Bob Dole there by around 6%. Now, taking a look at the county map, we can just briefly pull this up. Obviously, there's no New York Times page for, I didn't want to do that, for a 1996 statewide election, but this is kind of the best that we're going to get. And as you can see, we still see a lot of these Democratic counties being blue. Now at the St. Louis area, St. Louis City and County, both pretty blue. Some of these southern, more Appalachian counties, these ancestral Democrats down here in the southeastern portion of the state, pretty blue there. Plus the Kansas City area, and then expanding up north. And the north, kind of essentially, as you can tell, southwestern Missouri is like the reddest part of the state because it's just basically more of northern Arkansas, which is very red as well. For those of you who don't know, Arkansas is obviously a pretty red state, but there are some blue parts. Like Little Rock is decently blue, and so is the Delta region towards the border with Mississippi. If you look at a county map of the United States, the counties that in Arkansas, the border Mississippi, and the counties in Mississippi, the border Arkansas, are both pretty blue because they're significant black populations. But over here, kind of this area in between, where you have Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Missouri, that's one of the most Republican regions of the country. And even in 1996, where Clinton won the state by 6%, still a pretty red region. So Missouri, obviously a state that is that in the southwest is pretty red and has been for quite some time. Now in 2000, it was still pretty close, but George Bush did carry it. As you can see, southwest still pretty red, but in these ancestral Democrat areas, Gore did better. He did better in the Kansas City area, and of course here at St. Louis. John Kerry did pretty poorly here in 2004. This is kind of when the state started to slip away from Democrats at the presidential level. They did win a Senate race here in 2006, but Democrats, Kerry didn't campaign in Missouri as the election year. Like in September, October, he kind of pulled out of Missouri. In 2008, Obama lost the state. It was pretty close. It narrowed up, but still did not go for Obama despite him having a landslide. Then Romney carried the state by 9%, as you can see. And then Hillary Clinton had a god-awful performance in the state in 2016. And I mean, it was terrible. It was, her husband had carried the state 20 years ago, and from that time, and she still barely won the Jefferson City County. I'm forgetting the name. I think it might just be Jefferson County. It was still very close, and this is that county was a Democratic stronghold previously, and it ended up being like a narrow Clinton County. She won it by like 2 or 3. So just thought I'd bring that up. Now Biden did a little better in Missouri. He didn't do very well, but he did all right. For a Democrat, he kind of did like what we expected. He only lost it by 15. Clinton lost it by 19. So he did better. He did better in the St. Louis area. He did better in St. Charles County, which is kind of the bellwether county of the state. But it still won for Trump pretty convincingly. So yeah. Now we can take a look at the last time a Democrat won a statewide election here in 2012, and as you can see, this is good. It's better than the Clinton map because it's more recent. Now, McCaskill still did better in these Appalachian ancestral Democrat areas. She did better in Jackson County, which is where where Kansas City is in Springfield, the city, which is kind of a decently big city, the only urban area in this region of the state. Greene County went blue. This is obviously, and she ran against a horrible opponent, Todd Aiken, which we'll talk about in a second. But she won this state, and she won it by 15%. This was nothing to sneeze at. This wasn't like a narrow, fluke win. She won, and Missouri voters chose her overwhelmingly. Now they chose her over her opponent because her opponent, Todd Aiken, was a really bad opponent for a couple of reasons. And, basically, to give it a recap, Todd Aiken was Aiken made some very controversial statements about rape. Now, it's actually similar to the statements that that I forgot. It's either Richard or Rupert Murdoch. No, it's Richard. I'm thinking of someone else, but Richard Murdoch in Indiana and Todd Aiken in Missouri in 2012. They bungled two Senate seats that should have been won by the GOP. These are both Romney states that the GOP should have flipped these seats or should have won these seats, but they lost. Now, Aiken, I don't want to get too into it. It's kind of an uncomfortable topic for a lot of people, and it's really a sad thing. It's a tragic thing, but Todd Aiken essentially said that the female body has a way of shutting it down and not getting pregnant from rape, which that's completely false. There's nothing consensual about rape, and there never will be, but he was a very controversial person, and when he ran for the seat, that McCaskill used his own statements against him, and that was essentially cost him the seat. I think that had he not made those comments, the race would have been a lot closer. He might not have necessarily won, but he wouldn't have lost by 15. So this was kind of a fluke win for McCaskill that I just thought I'd bring up, but we still have to look at both sides of the equation. Now, in 2016, Roy Blunt won re-election pretty narrowly. He went up by around 3%, and he did better in some of these suburban areas like St. Charles County, which I think I mentioned earlier is kind of the bellwether of the state, than other Republicans like Trump. But in the rural part of the state, like down here, and even in these ancestral Democrat areas, he still did worse because Jason Kander, his opponent, ran as a pro-gun Democrat, and that he was an exceptional candidate. Now, there are two arguments here. The first is that Missouri is trending red, which it is. The rural areas are going faster than the urban suburban areas, and they're getting redder. Now, that's the first argument, and that is kind of the Republican favoring argument. Now, the second argument that you can make, or that a Democrat who thinks Missouri can flip would make, is okay, well, Kander ran in 2016 in a year that was pretty good for Republicans. They held the House. They only lost the popular vote by 2. Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate from Missouri. She got destroyed here, as I mentioned earlier. So in that, Kander, he could have won if this. He probably would have won if this were set in 2018. And had he ran against Blunt again. And I don't think either of those is particularly right, but I think that, the argument that Kander could have won if it was in 2018 is fair, but you're assuming that 2022 is going to be like 2018, which is probably not going to be. I'm 99% sure 2022 is going to be a more Republican year than 2018 based on just Biden being president. Now, we shouldn't base our predictions just off Biden being president, but we should take that into account. So, Kander probably hit the glass ceiling for Democrats in Missouri, shattered the glass ceiling, and I don't see any Democrat, whoever the Democrats run here in 2022 would be lucky to do as well as him. Again, he didn't run in the best environment, but he still was an exceptional candidate, and Missouri's only gotten redder since 2016. Now, in 2018, Claire McCaskill lost re-election. We talked about her earlier, how she won in 2012. She did not do as well as she did in 2012 as she did in 20. She did not do as well in 2018 as she did in 2012. And as you can see here, she lost to Josh Hawley, who is now kind of famous for his, very pro-Trump populist rhetoric. Now, McCaskill ran a decent campaign. She overperformed most Democrats down ballot, but she still didn't win in a year that was favorable to Democrats. Like, if a Democrat was going to win Missouri as recent as possible, it would be 2018. I think McCaskill is still in a better position to win than Kander in 2018 than Kander was in 2016 because the national environment being more favorable to her. Plus, she was an incumbent running against, at the time, Josh Hawley wasn't as well known as he is now. So if she couldn't win, I don't care. We can talk about the candidates in 2022. I don't care what happens. I don't see Missouri being anything less than like a 10-point Republican victory. Now, let's take a look at the candidates. Now, for the Democratic Party, these are kind of a bunch of no-names. Tim Shepard, Scott Sifton is the one who has a Wikipedia page. He's a former state senator. Apparently, he didn't run for re-election in 2020, or maybe he lost. But so he's a state senator. He's the only one who's actually somewhat known because he has a Wikipedia page. And Quentin Lucas, who's the mayor of Kansas City, has expressed interest, but even he'd probably be their best candidate, but he still isn't very still isn't very isn't he's not, because if the Democrats want to win an election here, they have to run a great candidate. So he's no Jason Kander. Now let's look at the Republican candidates. So I have to scroll up. Oops. As you can see here, we have a few candidates that have declared, 2 of which have a Wikipedia page, so we're just kind of going to ignore Rick Combs, who actually was the Libertarian nominee for governor in 2020. Now, Eric Schmidt, who is the Missouri Attorney General, he has declared he's probably their best candidate as of right now because he's, unknown, which is a good thing in a solid red state like Missouri. Like, as long as people don't have a huge problem with him, he should cruise to winning this race. Now, Eric Greitens, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, Greitens, I think. He was the former governor of Missouri, and he only served for a year because he resigned because he had some really bad sexual assault allegations coming against him. And, people are comparing him to Todd Aiken. Now, you can do that because Aiken, he made some very unpopular comments about rape that, quite frankly, did not bode well for him. And Eric Greitens, he actually was accused of rape, which is obviously it's not a good thing for a candidate to have scandals. But Missouri voters in 2012 showed that they were kind of that they weren't going to be as partisan as you would expect because they elected a Democrat by 15% on the same ballot as Romney won the state by 9. Now, I don't want to talk too much about Greitens because I think he might not even get the nomination. Now, if he does get the nomination, I do think that he'd still win by probably 9 or 10. And I say this because, again, the partisanship of Missouri is more elastic than you might think. But it's still Missouri. It's still a year where Biden's president. It's still a year that's going to be more favorable to Republicans than the previous midterm where a Democrat lost. And I don't think that whoever the Democrats run is going to be as well known as McCaskill or Kander or as popular as them or have the ability to call out Greitens for his scandals. So, yeah. Now, for this reason, I am going to say that this race is safe Republican. It could go down to likely if Greitens does get the nomination. It could be even lean at best for the Democrats if he tanks in the polls and Missouri voters seem to really dislike him. But for now, it's safe Republican, and I don't think we should characterize it as anything else. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.